There's something particularly devastating about being dismissed by your own family. Not strangers on the street who might judge you based on your appearance, not nosy neighbors who whisper behind their curtains about your choices, but the people who are supposed to love you unconditionally, who should know better than anyone else what you're truly made of, who should see past the surface to the person you've always been. I'm 73 years old, and until 6 months ago, I thought I knew exactly where I stood with my grandchildren. I believe they saw me as the loving, supportive grandmother who'd been there for every important moment in their lives, who'd celebrated their victories and comforted them through their defeats. I was wrong. Dead wrong. And the discovery of just how wrong I was would lead to the most painful and ultimately transformative experience of my life. My name is Eleanor Marie Patterson, but everyone calls me Ellie. I've been a widow for 8 long years now, ever since my beloved Harold passed from a massive heart attack that came out of nowhere on a Tuesday morning in March. I still remember every detail of that devastating day, the way the morning sun was streaming through our kitchen window, how Harold had been humming while making his coffee, the sound of our newspaper hitting the front porch just moments before I heard him collapse in the hallway. We've been married 47 beautiful, complicated, wonderful years, and in all that time, we lived what everyone assumed was a modest, unremarkable life. Harold worked at the United States Postal Service for 32 years, starting as a mail carrier walking routes in all kinds of weather and eventually working his way up through sheer determination and reliability to become postmaster of our local branch. I was a part-time bookkeeper at Morrison & Associates, a small but busy accounting firm downtown where I managed the books for over 60 local businesses, from family restaurants to construction companies to small retail shops. We drove the same reliable Honda Civic for 15 years, treating it like a member of the family, keeping it meticulously maintained until it finally gave up the ghost with over 200,000 miles on the odometer. We shopped with coupons religiously, not out of desperation but out of principle, finding genuine satisfaction in stretching every dollar as far as it would go. We never took vacations that couldn't be paid for in cash up front, believing firmly that debt was something to be avoided at all costs, a trap that too many people fell into without considering the long-term consequences. We lived in the same cozy 2-bedroom house on Maple Street for 43 years, with its cheerful red door that Harold painted every 3 years like clockwork, timing it perfectly so the paint would be fresh and bright for each Christmas season. Our white picket fence needed constant maintenance but somehow always looked perfect, a testament to Harold's meticulous care and attention to detail. The house had its quirks: floorboards that creaked in predictable patterns, a bathroom faucet that never quite stopped dripping no matter how many times Harold tried to fix it, windows that stuck in humid weather, but it was ours, and we loved every imperfect inch of it. To anyone looking from the outside, we were the epitome of middle-class modesty. But appearances, as I would eventually teach my family, can be incredibly deceiving. Harold and I were happy. More than happy, we were content in a way I see so few people achieve these days, especially young couples who seem to think happiness comes from constant excitement and endless material accumulation. We had our routines that might have seemed boring to outsiders but felt comforting and meaningful to us. We had our little house with its creaky floorboards that sang a familiar song every morning when Harold got up for work, our kitchen table where we shared thousands of meals and conversations, our small backyard garden where Harold grew the most spectacular tomatoes you've ever seen, fat and red and so sweet they tasted like summer itself captured in perfect form. We had our evening walks around the neighborhood, the same route every night after dinner, nodding to neighbors and commenting on their gardens, stopping to pet dogs whose names we knew as well as their owners. We had our Sunday drives through the countryside, exploring back roads in small towns, sometimes stopping at roadside stands to buy fresh corn or apples, always finding something beautiful or interesting to talk about on the way home. Most importantly, we had our 3 children, each as different from the others as night and day, but all deeply loved and carefully raised. Michael, our eldest, was always the serious one, the rule follower who worried constantly about doing the right thing and making everyone proud. Even as a little boy, he organized his toys by size and color, made detailed plans for school projects weeks in advance, and took his role as big brother with almost comical seriousness. Susan, our only daughter and middle child, inherited my practical nature and Harold's methodical approach to life. She was the child who could organize a school fundraiser or coordinate a family reunion with military precision, who always had backup plans for her backup plans. And David, our baby, was the free spirit of the family, creative and spontaneous and charming, full of artistic dreams and big ideas, but never quite able to find steady footing in a world that seemed to reward structure and conformity over imagination and intuition. They gave us 7 grandchildren between them, ranging from 12 to 26 years old. Tyler and Madison were Michael's children, Tyler now 26 and fresh out of college, Madison 20 and supposedly mature beyond her years. Melissa and James belonged to Susan, quiet and thoughtful children. David's 3, Casey, Alex, and little Emma, were still young enough to think their grandmother hung the moon. Or so I thought. After Harold died, everyone expected me to fall apart completely, to become one of those tragic widows who never recovers from the loss. The neighbors brought casseroles for weeks, appearing at my door with sympathetic smiles and aluminum-covered dishes that I mostly ended up freezing because I couldn't bear to eat them, each one a reminder of pity rather than comfort. My children took turns checking on me daily, calling every morning and evening with voices full of careful concern, showing up unannounced under various pretexts to make sure I was coping appropriately with my new reality. The ladies from my book club, my church circle, and my volunteer groups kept inviting me to lunch with that particular blend of kindness and pity reserved for fresh widows, as if I were now a charity case who needed constant monitoring to prevent complete emotional collapse. But I didn't fall apart, much to everyone's surprise and, I suspect, some people's disappointment. I grieved deeply. Harold had been my anchor, my best friend, my partner in everything from major life decisions to choosing what to watch on television Sunday evenings. The house felt impossibly empty without his humming in the morning, his voice calling out observations about the weather or the neighbors, his presence filling spaces I hadn't even realized he occupied. The loss of him left a hole in my life that I knew would never be completely filled, a Harold-shaped absence that made even familiar activities feel strange and incomplete. But I also discovered something unexpected in those first difficult months of widowhood. I was stronger than anyone had given me credit for, including myself. I was more capable, more resilient, more determined to live fully rather than just survive than I'd ever had occasion to prove before. Grief, I learned, doesn't have to mean giving up on life. It can mean appreciating life more deeply, understanding its fragility and preciousness in ways that only come through loss. I stayed in the house despite everyone's suggestions that I sell it and move into a senior community. "Mom, you're rattling around in that big house all by yourself," Susan would say, her voice dripping with barely contained annoyance. "What if something happens? What if you fall?" But I wasn't rattling around. I was living. I was 73, not 93, and I had no intention of shuffling off to wait for death while playing bingo at 4:30. I had hobbies and activities that filled my days with genuine purpose and joy, giving me reasons to get up in the morning and face the world with energy and enthusiasm. I volunteered at the Riverside Animal Shelter twice a week, where I walked dogs with wonderful names like Buttercup and Rex and Duke, helped coordinate adoption events that filled me with satisfaction when I saw scared, abandoned animals find their forever families, and occasionally fostered puppies that needed extra care and attention before they were ready for permanent homes. There is something magical about watching a frightened, traumatized animal learn to trust again, about seeing their personalities emerge as they realize they're safe, about witnessing the moment when they meet their new families and trot off into lives full of possibility and unconditional love. I took a pottery class at the community center and discovered, to my amazement and delight, that I had natural talent for working with clay. My hands, which had balanced ledgers and changed diapers and kneaded bread and braided hair for so many decades, found a new kind of rhythm in shaping clay into beautiful, functional objects. I made bowls and vases and little figurines, experimenting with different glazes and bright blues and sunny yellows and deep forest greens, each piece unique and imperfect in the way that handmade things always are, but beautiful in its own distinctive way. The pottery wheel became a form of meditation for me, a place where I could lose track of time and worry, where my hands worked independently of my conscious mind to create something useful and lovely. I even learned to use a smartphone and tablet, despite the widespread assumption that people my age were technologically hopeless and set in their ways. I joined Facebook and Instagram, posting pictures of my pottery creations and my thriving garden and the incredible sunsets I could see from my back porch, where the sky would turn shades of pink and orange and purple that seemed almost too beautiful to be real. I shared inspirational quotes that spoke to my heart and reflected my outlook on life, stories about the wonderful dogs at the shelter, updates about my volunteer work at the literacy center where I helped adults learn to read, people who'd fallen through the cracks of the education system and were now, in their 30s and 40s and 50s, finally getting the skills they needed to build better lives for themselves and their families. The eye rolling from my family should have been my first clue about what was coming. Chapter 1: The Slow Erosion. Looking back now, I can see the signs were there long before the catastrophic dinner that would finally open my eyes. The disrespect didn't happen overnight, it was a gradual erosion, like water slowly wearing away stone. It started with small comments and subtle behaviors that I told myself I was being too sensitive about, incidents that I tried to brush off as misunderstandings or temporary stress on their part. The first real incident that should have served as a wake-up call happened at my grandson Tyler's high school graduation 2 years ago. I'd planned for this important milestone for weeks, trying on different combinations of clothing, asking the friendly saleswoman at Nordstrom for advice about what would be appropriate for such a significant occasion, finally settling on a beautiful bright purple dress with matching shoes and a stylish hat with a small feather tucked into the band. The color made me feel vibrant and alive, confident and celebratory, like I was properly honoring Tyler's achievement while also expressing my own personality and joy in his success. I felt beautiful in that outfit, genuinely beautiful in a way I hadn't felt in months since Harold's death. I stood in front of my bedroom mirror that morning, adjusting the hat and smoothing the dress, and for the first time in a long time, I liked what I saw. I looked like a woman who refused to let age diminish her spirit, who understood that celebration called for festive colors and joyful presentation. But when I arrived at the high school auditorium, carefully navigating the crowded parking lot in my heels and making my way through the throngs of families toward the section where our group was seated, I overheard my daughter-in-law Jennifer whisper to another parent behind me, "That's Tyler's grandmother. She means well, I suppose, but she has absolutely no sense of appropriate dress for someone her age. It's almost sad, really, the way she tries so hard to look young. Someone should probably have a talk with her before she embarrasses herself further." Appropriate dress for someone my age. The words hit me like a physical blow, stealing the joy from the moment and replacing it with a cold, creeping shame. As if there was some invisible handbook distributed to women on their 70th birthday that dictated purple was off limits, that bright colors were somehow undignified or inappropriate once you reached a certain arbitrary number of years on Earth. I spent the entire graduation ceremony feeling self-conscious and uncomfortable, tugging at my hemline and wondering if everyone in the auditorium was staring at the foolish old woman who'd forgotten her place in the social hierarchy. Then there was the incident at my granddaughter Melissa's Sweet 16 party. I'd spent weeks working on a special gift, a pottery vase hand-painted with delicate roses because she'd always loved flowers. I'd researched glazing techniques, practiced brush strokes, put 40 hours of love into creating something unique just for her. When I presented it to her, she looked at it like I'd handed her garbage. "Oh, thanks, Grandma," she said politely but dismissively, setting it aside to open the next gift, a designer purse from her other grandmother, Jennifer's mother, who everyone called Nana Gloria. I watched as Melissa squealed over that store-bought purse, hugging Nana Gloria tight and gushing about how perfect it was. My handmade creation sat forgotten among the wrapping paper scraps. Later, when I was helping clean up, I found it shoved behind some chairs, obviously moved to make room for more important gifts. But it wasn't just the gifts. When I'd suggest family activities, maybe a picnic in the park like we used to have when the kids were young, I'd be politely overruled in favor of expensive restaurants where conversation was impossible. "Mom, we can't have everyone over to your house," Michael would say with that patient tone you use with children. "There's not enough space, and it's too much work for you." Besides, Jennifer already made reservations. When I tried to share stories about my pottery class or volunteer work, I'd see eyes glaze over, people checking their phones, conversations shifting to other topics. My interests were treated like the irrelevant ramblings of someone whose opinions no longer mattered. There was the time I posted a photo on Facebook of a stunning sunset from my back porch, with a quote about finding beauty in everyday moments. Tyler commented within hours, "Grandma, you post stuff like this every single day. Maybe dial it back? It's kind of overwhelming." Several of his friends liked the comment, turning my moment of joy into public mockery. At the family barbecue, I wore a bright yellow sundress that made me feel vibrant and alive. I overheard Susan tell her husband, "I really need to take mom shopping. She's dressing like she's 40 instead of 73. It's getting embarrassing." When I mentioned thinking about taking a watercolor class, David actually laughed. "Mom, don't you think you have enough hobbies already? Maybe it's time to slow down a little and act your age." Act your age. Slow down. As if being 73 meant I should just sit and wait for death. The most painful moments were often the subtle ones. My grandchildren would automatically turn to Nana Gloria for advice about everything, but it never occurred to them that I might have wisdom worth seeking. They'd post photos of their accomplishments on social media and tag everyone in the family except me. They'd discuss their problems and dreams when I was sitting right there, but talk around me as if I weren't present. I started feeling invisible in my own family gatherings. Not just old, but irrelevant. Like I was taking up space at dinners, tolerated because obligation demanded it but not truly welcome. I began dreading family events instead of looking forward to them. I'd spend hours getting ready, choosing clothes carefully to avoid appearing inappropriate, hoping this time would be different. But it never was. The worst part was that I started believing them. I began seeing myself through their eyes, as a silly old woman desperately clinging to youth, making a fool of herself with bright clothes and social media posts. I considered changing, becoming who they wanted me to be. Maybe I should buy beige cardigans like Nana Gloria. Maybe I should quit pottery class and delete my social media accounts. Maybe if I made myself smaller, quieter, more invisible, they'd be less embarrassed by me. But every time I imagined myself in beige, something inside me rebelled. I wasn't ready to disappear. Chapter 2: The Breaking Point. The catastrophic evening that would change everything happened on a humid Thursday in September, at Michael's 50th birthday celebration. Jennifer had been planning the dinner for weeks with military precision, choosing La Bernardine, that ridiculously expensive French restaurant downtown where they charge $40 for a piece of fish and act like they're doing you a favor. I'd suggested we celebrate at my house instead, grill some steaks in the backyard, make Harold's famous potato salad, sit around the picnic table under the string lights where we could actually talk to each other. But my suggestion was dismissed with the usual condescension. "Mom, we can't fit everyone at your little dining table," Michael had said. "Besides, Jennifer's been looking forward to trying this place." So there we were, 3 generations crammed around 2 pushed-together tables in a restaurant so pretentious they brought you 7 different types of bread and explained the provenance of each one. I was seated at the far end next to 12-year-old Casey, David's youngest, which should have been a clue about my status in the family hierarchy. Casey was the only one who seemed genuinely happy to see me. "Did you know dolphins have names for each other, Grandma Ellie?" she said excitedly. "They each have a special whistle that's like their signature." "That's absolutely fascinating, sweetheart," I said, genuinely interested. "What else did you learn?" "They're super smart, and they help each other when they're hurt. They're kind of like people, but maybe nicer because they don't judge each other." The innocence of that comment hit me hard. Here was a 12-year-old who understood acceptance better than the adults at this table. I was about to ask Casey more when I noticed the conversation at the other end had grown quiet. Not comfortable quiet, but tense, anticipatory quiet. I looked up to see Tyler, now 26 and apparently too sophisticated for family celebrations, staring at me with an expression I'd never seen before. It was embarrassment mixed with disgust, the way you might look at someone making a spectacle of themselves. "Grandma," he said, his voice carrying across the suddenly silent table, "do you have to be so extra all the time?" Extra? That word hit me like a physical blow, stealing my breath and making my heart race. "I don't understand, sweetheart," I managed to say. "What do you mean?" "The way you dress," chimed in 20-year-old Madison, gesturing dismissively at my coral blouse and turquoise necklace. "The bright colors, the statement jewelry. You dress like you're trying to be our age instead of acting like a proper grandmother." Around the table, the adults were studying their plates, their drinks, anything but me. No one was coming to my defense. "And the way you post on Facebook and Instagram," added Melissa. "All those inspirational quotes and sunset pictures and your pottery projects. It's so embarrassing." My friends ask me about my weird grandmother who acts like a teenager online. Embarrassing, I repeated quietly, the word tasting bitter. We love you, Grandma, Tyler said, but his tone suggested otherwise. But you're 73 years old. Maybe it's time to start acting like it. What does acting 73 look like to you? I asked. Madison rolled her eyes theatrically. You know. Calmer. More dignified. More grandmother-like. Like Nana Gloria. Nana Gloria, who wore exclusively beige, who brought store-bought cookies to gatherings, who never expressed an opinion stronger than mild approval. Nana Gloria, who had faded so completely into the background she was practically invisible. Maybe you could take up knitting or needlepoint, suggested James, Susan's 18-year-old, and several people actually chuckled as if this was genuinely amusing. Something more age-appropriate, agreed Alex, David's 16-year-old. The laughter that followed felt like knives in my chest. These children, my grandchildren, whom I had helped raise, were laughing at me. They were treating me like some eccentric relative whose quirks were tolerated out of obligation. And the adults, my own children, were just sitting there, letting it happen. Worse, they were nodding along as if their children were finally saying what they'd all been thinking. Little Casey was the only one who looked genuinely upset. I don't think Grandma Ellie is embarrassing, she said defiantly. I think she's interesting and fun and beautiful. Tyler snorted. You're 12, Casey. You don't understand how the world works. Understand what? She shot back with fearless honesty. That it's okay to be mean to people just because they're older? That being old means you have to stop being yourself? We're not being mean, Madison said defensively. We're being honest. Someone needs to tell her the truth. The truth that I should disappear? That I should stop existing as a full person because I'd reached an age where my interests were deemed inappropriate? I looked around that table at these people who were supposed to love me unconditionally. Instead, I saw embarrassment, impatience, and a desire for me to conform to their narrow expectations. I see, I said, standing slowly. Well, I certainly wouldn't want to continue embarrassing anyone. I placed my napkin beside my barely touched salmon and picked up my purse. Where are you going, Mom? Susan asked, finally speaking up. Home, I said simply. I think I've learned everything I need to know about where I stand in this family. Grandma, wait, Casey called out, but I was already walking toward the exit. Let her go, I heard Tyler say behind me. Maybe now she'll finally get the message. The walk through the restaurant felt endless. The parking lot was mercifully empty, and I made it to my Honda before the sobs started. They came in great, gulping waves that seemed to originate from somewhere deep in my soul. I sat in that parking lot for 25 minutes, crying harder than I had since Harold's funeral. Not just because my feelings were hurt, but because I finally understood that I had been fooling myself. I had thought I was living boldly, but to my family, I was just a silly old woman who didn't know her place. The drive home was a blur of streetlights and tears. When I pulled into my driveway, I sat looking at the house Harold and I had called home for 43 years. It looked smaller somehow, lonelier. That night, sitting in Harold's old recliner, I made the decision that would change everything. Chapter 3: The Quiet Revolution. The next morning, I woke up with unusual clarity. The hurt was still there, a deep ache in my chest, but it was accompanied by something more powerful, determination. I made myself coffee using the good china cups Harold and I had received as a wedding gift but rarely used because they were too nice for every day. If being humiliated by my grandchildren wasn't special enough for the good china, what was? Then I sat at my kitchen table with a legal pad and started making lists. The first list was titled Every Hurtful Thing They've Said or Done. I wrote for 2 hours, filling pages with incidents I tried to forget or excuse. The eye rolls when I expressed an opinion. The way conversations stopped when I entered a room. The dismissive responses to my stories about pottery class or volunteer work. I wrote about the graduations where I'd been seated with children instead of adults, the holidays where my gifts were opened last and forgotten first, the family photos where I was positioned at the edge as if I might be cropped out later. The second list was everything I've done for this family. This took even longer. 47 years of marriage, creating a stable home for 3 children. Thousands of hours of unpaid childcare when money was tight. Birthday parties I'd planned and paid for when my children were struggling financially. Christmas presents bought with money Harold and I could barely afford. I documented every emergency loan never repaid, every favor never acknowledged, every sacrifice made without complaint because that's what family was supposed to do. The third list was the most important: everything they don't know about me. This was where I wrote about the woman I'd been before becoming just mom and grandma. The girl who graduated valedictorian despite coming from a family where no one had gone to college. The young woman who put herself through business school working 3 jobs, cleaning offices at night, waitressing weekends, filing papers during the day. I wrote about the investment account Harold and I had opened when we were 25, back when we were living in a tiny apartment eating ramen noodles for dinner. How we'd started with $25 a month, money scraped together by walking instead of taking buses, making coffee instead of buying it. They didn't know that the modest postal worker had been promoted to postmaster after 15 years, managing 12 employees and overseeing operations serving 30,000 residents. They didn't know that the part-time bookkeeper had become head financial officer at Morrison & Associates, managing millions in client assets. Most importantly, they didn't know about the education fund Harold and I had established for every grandchild, money we'd been setting aside since each was born. Money representing thousands of sacrifices over decades. That afternoon, I called Warren McAllister, our financial advisor of 20 years. Warren had guided me through Harold's death with patience and respect, unlike my family, who treated me like I couldn't understand complicated financial matters. "Ellie," he said when I entered his office, "you look like a woman with something important on her mind." "I need to know exactly where we stand, Warren. Everything. And I need to understand all my options." Warren pulled up our accounts and turned the monitor so I could see. "Between your investment portfolio, Harold's life insurance payout, retirement accounts, and mutual funds, you're looking at just over $2.8 million. $2.8 million. Nearly $3 million my family didn't know existed. Of course, there's also the education fund for the grandchildren. That's completely separate from your personal assets." "How much is in that fund now?" $412,000. "You've been contributing faithfully since Tyler was born 26 years ago." I sat back, processing this. For over a quarter century, I'd been setting aside money for my grandchildren's educational futures. Money that could pay for college, graduate school, whatever they wanted to pursue. Money representing thousands of small sacrifices Harold and I had made. "Warren, what would happen if I wanted to restructure how that fund is distributed?" Warren raised an eyebrow. "What kind of restructuring?" "The kind where children who think their grandmother is an embarrassment might need to learn some lessons about respect before they see a penny." A slow smile spread across Warren's face. "Ellie, I've been waiting 40 years for someone to ask me that question. Let me show you exactly what your options are." We spent 3 hours going over every detail. Warren explained how I could attach conditions to distributions, require specific criteria before my grandchildren could access their education money, ensure my wishes were followed even after I was gone. Warren had seen this story before: children and grandchildren who took elders for granted, right until they discovered what those embarrassing grandparents had actually accomplished. "The thing is, Ellie," Warren said, "this is your money. Yours and Harold's. You can do whatever you want with it." "I don't want to be cruel," I said. "I'm not angry enough to cut them off completely. But I am angry enough to make sure they understand what they almost lost." That evening, I called my friend Ruth, the only person besides Warren who knew about our finances. Ruth had been my closest friend since we were young mothers, and she'd been my lifeline after Harold died. "They called you embarrassing?" Ruth practically shouted when I told her about the dinner. "Those ungrateful little brats?" "Ruth, please," I said, but I was smiling for the first time in days. "No, I will not please. Ellie, you are one of the most vibrant, accomplished women I know. You've kept yourself in shape, learned new skills, you volunteer, you're financially independent. You're exactly what 73 should look like." I told her about my meeting with Warren, about restructuring the education fund. "You know what's beautiful about this?" Ruth said after listening. "You're not doing it to be cruel. You're teaching consequences. There's a difference between revenge and natural consequences, and what you're planning is definitely consequences. 2 weeks later, I got the phone call that would set everything in motion. Chapter 4, The Revelation. It was Susan who called, and I could hear desperation in her voice before she even explained why. "Mom," she said, "we have a family crisis and need to talk immediately. Can you come over tonight? This is about Madison, and it's urgent." "What's wrong with Madison?" "She got accepted to Columbia University for graduate school, that master's program in international relations she's been dreaming about for years. It's an incredible opportunity. The program has direct connections to the United Nations, various embassies, the State Department. It could launch her entire diplomatic career." I waited for the other shoe to drop. But the financial aid package isn't nearly enough. She needs $40,000 per year for 2 years. $80,000 total. Michael and Jennifer are already stretched with Tyler's student loans, and David's been struggling since his divorce. We were hoping. If you had anything saved. $80,000. Less than 20% of the education fund Harold and I had been building for 26 years. I'll be there at 7. That evening, I drove to Susan's house with a manila folder under my arm. Inside were documents Warren had prepared, account statements that would completely transform my family's understanding of who I was. The entire family was assembled when I arrived, and the atmosphere was thick with desperate hope. For the first time in months, they were looking at me not with embarrassment but with need. Suddenly, the grandmother they'd been eager to diminish was potentially useful. Madison herself was sitting on the couch looking appropriately humble, wearing a conservative outfit probably chosen to appear deserving. She was the same young woman who told me my Facebook posts were embarrassing 3 weeks earlier. "Tell me about this program, Madison," I said, settling into my usual chair. Madison's face lit up with genuine enthusiasm. "It's a master's in international relations with a concentration in diplomatic studies, Grandma. The professors have worked for the State Department, the UN, major international organizations. They don't just teach theory, they share real experience from diplomatic missions and international negotiations." She spoke passionately about her 5-year plan for building a diplomatic career, her interest in conflict resolution, her dreams of representing the United States in embassies worldwide. For a moment, I felt pure grandmother pride. Then Tyler spoke. "Madison deserves this opportunity more than anyone, Grandma. She's not like some people who waste time on silly hobbies instead of focusing on what actually matters." The dig was subtle but unmistakable. Even now, needing my help, they couldn't resist taking shots at my interests. "How much can you contribute, Mom?" Susan asked gently. "We understand you're on a fixed income, but even a few thousand would help." A fixed income. A few thousand. They thought I was living on Social Security and Harold's postal pension, scraping by and shopping with coupons out of necessity. "We've talked to the bank about a second mortgage," David added. "Susan's researching loan options, but the interest rates are brutal." They were planning to go into crushing debt for Madison's education, never suspecting their embarrassing mother had more money than they could imagine. I opened my folder and pulled out the first document. "Actually," I said calmly, "I can cover the entire amount." The room went dead silent. I could hear the grandfather clock in Susan's hallway, the refrigerator humming, someone's sharp intake of breath. "Cover what exactly?" David whispered. "All of it. The full $80,000 for Madison's graduate program." I placed the education fund statement on the coffee table where everyone could see it. The number at the bottom, $412,847, seemed to glow. Michael was first to speak, voice hoarse with shock. "Mom, what? What is this?" "It's an education fund your father and I established when Tyler was born. We've been contributing to it faithfully for 26 years. There's enough money to pay for college and graduate school for every single grandchild." The silence stretched as implications sank in. Tyler, drowning in student debt, stared at the paper like it might disappear. Melissa, who'd been planning to skip college because of cost, looked like she'd won the lottery. $400,000? Jennifer whispered. "You've had this money all along?" $412,847, to be exact. Madison's face had gone pale. You've been saving for our education this whole time? Your grandfather and I started setting aside money for your educational futures the day each of you was born. We wanted to ensure financial constraints would never limit your dreams. But why didn't you tell us? Tyler asked, voice cracking. I looked directly at him, this young man who called me extra. Because we wanted you to understand the value of education, to work hard and take it seriously. We didn't want success handed to you without effort. I paused. Also, because no one asked. No one thought the silly old woman with embarrassing hobbies might have something useful to contribute. The silence that followed was different, heavier, filled with recognition and dawning guilt. Grandma, Madison said, voice small and shaky, I'm so sorry about what I said at the restaurant. I didn't mean. Yes, you did, I interrupted firmly. You meant every word. You all did. I stood and walked to the window, looking out at Susan's perfect lawn. Do you know what hurt most? Not the insults. It was realizing you'd stop seeing me as a person. I became just an obligation to manage at family gatherings. That's not true, David protested weakly. When was the last time you asked about my interests? Included me in family decisions? Treated me like my opinions mattered? The questions hung unanswered because we all knew the truth. I pulled out the second document, my complete financial portfolio. This is my full financial situation, I said, placing it beside the education fund statement. Michael picked up the paper, face going white. This says, $2.8 million? Your father and I were very good at living below our means and investing wisely. The room erupted. Everyone talking at once, expressing shock, trying to process this complete revision of everything they thought they knew about me. Finally, Susan managed coherent words. Mom, why are you showing us this now? Because I want you to understand what almost happened. I want you to understand what you almost lost because you were too embarrassed by me to see who I actually am. I pulled out the final document, the legal papers restructuring the education fund. I've made changes to how the fund will be distributed. The money's still there, but there are conditions now. What kind of conditions? Madison asked nervously. 3 requirements. First, each grandchild needs to write me a detailed letter explaining what they want to study and why it matters, not a generic essay, but real conversation about dreams and goals. I looked at each face. Second, spend at least 40 hours volunteering with elderly people. Not as punishment, but education. Learn that age doesn't erase wisdom and value. And third? Tyler asked quietly. Have genuine conversations with me. Know your grandmother as Eleanor, not just as someone who sends birthday cards. Understand who I was before you were born, what I've learned in 73 years. Madison was crying now. Grandma, I never thought about how we were treating you. Our culture teaches that older people are less valuable. You absorb those messages without questioning them. I looked around the room at my family, children who'd forgotten I existed before they were born, grandchildren who'd never considered I might have wisdom worth sharing. Here's what happens now. Those who want a real relationship with me will have access to everything: financial support, emotional support, 7 decades of experience. Those who don't will be respected for that choice but not financially supported for it. As I gathered my documents to leave, Madison called out, Grandma, wait. Can I start with the conversation requirement? I don't want to wait for money. I want to know who you really are. One by one, the others nodded. Even Tyler was looking at me with something like respect. Good, I said. Come to my house Sunday. I'll make Harold's pot roast, and we'll start from the beginning. Epilogue, 6 months later. As I write this, 6 months after that confrontational evening, everything has changed. Not overnight, healing takes time, but the transformation has been remarkable. Madison is thriving at Columbia, calling weekly not just about her classes but because she genuinely values our relationship. Her volunteer work at the nursing home continued long after her required hours because she discovered how much wisdom older people possess. Grandma, she said in our last conversation, I met this woman who was a war correspondent in Vietnam. She covered dangerous battles and has stories that should be in history books. She's 92, and people walk past her room like she's invisible. It makes me angry now when I see how society treats older people. Tyler changed his entire career path after volunteering at the Veterans Hospital. Instead of the law degree he'd planned, he's pursuing social work with elderly populations. I found my calling, Grandma, he told me. Working with elderly veterans showed me there's so much wisdom being wasted because we don't value older people. I want to spend my career building bridges between generations. Melissa not only decided to attend college but chose art therapy, specializing in memory care facilities. She keeps my hand-painted pottery vase on her dorm room desk, a reminder, she says, to pay attention to things made with love. My relationships with my adult children have evolved too. Susan joins me for pottery classes now and discovered natural artistic ability. Michael asks for financial advice, finally recognizing my expertise. David comes over Saturday mornings to help with yard work but more importantly, to talk about his struggles and dreams. The education fund became fully operational, with clear guidelines ensuring each grandchild understood the value of what they were receiving. But more importantly, it became a vehicle for building genuine intergenerational relationships. 3 weeks ago, Jennifer called asking me to mentor her depressed 75-year-old mother about aging gracefully. The woman who once criticized my inappropriate dress now wanted me to teach her mother about living boldly at any age. I still wear bright colors, still post inspirational quotes, still take pottery classes and volunteer at the shelter. But now, instead of eye rolls, my family asks about my pottery projects, my shelter dogs, my volunteer work. They've learned their embarrassing grandmother is someone worth knowing. The most meaningful change is how I see myself. I'm no longer apologizing for my interests or trying to make myself smaller. I'm living authentically, pursuing new challenges like animal behavior certification at 73. Last Sunday, Tyler asked what I'd do differently if I could go back. I wouldn't change how I lived, I said. I wouldn't tone down my colors or abandon my interests. But I might have spoken up sooner about feeling dismissed. You were right, Madison said quietly. We should have seen your worth without you proving it with bank statements. The fund in my name became about more than money, it became about recognition, respect, and the power of living authentically. It proved that age doesn't diminish worth, that 73 can be vibrant and purposeful. Yesterday, I received an email from Madison with photos from her internship at the embassy in London. She was wearing a bright red coat and huge smile, looking confident and ready to take on the world. At the bottom, she'd written, "Thank you for teaching me that being bold and bright isn't something you have to outgrow. I'm going to be exactly like you when I'm 73. That might be the greatest compliment I've ever received. The ripple effects have extended beyond our family. Word got around, as it always does in small towns, that the widow lady on Maple Street who took pottery classes was actually a multimillionaire. Instead of being embarrassed by the attention, I found myself serving as an informal financial mentor to other women, especially widows struggling to manage finances independently. I started volunteering with a local nonprofit providing financial literacy education to seniors, sharing the strategies Harold and I use to build wealth. Margaret Thornfield, an 81-year-old dynamo I'd met at the grocery store months earlier, became a close friend and collaborator. Together, we started a program called Wisdom Warriors, connecting accomplished older women with younger people who could benefit from their experience. Eleanor, Margaret said during one of our planning meetings, "You've started something important. You've shown people that age brings wisdom, not irrelevance. You've demonstrated that older women can be financial powerhouses and sources of strength for their families." The education fund has grown to over $500,000, and every penny will be used as Harold and I intended, to give our grandchildren opportunities to learn and contribute meaningfully to the world. But more importantly, it became a symbol of love, sacrifice, and the forward-thinking planning that characterizes healthy family relationships. Warren McAllister now uses our story as an example for other clients about estate planning and family communication. Eleanor and Harold Patterson's approach is a model for how financial resources can build stronger relationships rather than create dependency, he tells them. Their fund wasn't just about money, it was about teaching values and ensuring each generation understood previous generations' sacrifices. But perhaps the most meaningful recognition came 3 months ago when I was invited to speak at a conference on successful aging at the local university. Standing before 200 people ranging from college students to nonagenarians, I shared our family's story of learning to see past age-based stereotypes. The most important thing I've learned, I told the audience, is that respect isn't automatically granted based on age, but it shouldn't be automatically withheld because of age either. Every person, regardless of years lived, deserves to be seen as complete, with something valuable to offer. After my presentation, a young woman approached with tears in her eyes. "Mrs. Patterson, your story made me realize how badly I've been treating my own grandmother. I'm going to call her tonight and ask her to tell me about her life." An elderly man shook my hand saying, "Thank you for showing us we don't have to become invisible just because we're older. You've inspired me to stop apologizing for having opinions at my age." But the comment that meant most came from a middle-aged woman who reminded me of my children during our difficulties. "I've been treating my mother exactly like your family treated you," she admitted. "Always managing her, trying to get her to act her age, being embarrassed by her enthusiasm. Your story showed me I'm not protecting her, I'm diminishing her. I need to make changes." The transformation in our family relationships created a new understanding that extends to how we treat all older people. My grandchildren have become advocates for elderly individuals in their communities, understanding that dismissing someone because of age means missing decades of wisdom and experience. Casey, now 13 and more mature than many adults, regularly volunteers at a nursing home reading to residents. Some of these people lived through World War II, the Civil Rights Movement, the moon landing, she says with genuine awe. They have amazing stories, and most people never bother listening. Tyler's blog Bridging Generations shares stories about remarkable older people and challenges readers to examine assumptions about aging. His post about our family's journey went viral, inspiring other young people to reevaluate relationships with elderly relatives. "Grandma Eleanor taught me that age isn't an expiration date for dreams or relevance," he wrote. "She showed me that dismissing someone because of age means missing out on wisdom that could enrich your life immeasurably." Melissa's art therapy work gained national attention when she presented research on intergenerational creative programs benefiting both elderly participants and younger facilitators. She's been invited to conferences about using art to bridge generational divides and combat ageism in healthcare. The weekly Sunday dinners at my house have become the highlight of my week, filled with genuine conversation and deep connection. These gatherings represent everything I'd hoped family could be, multiple generations truly seeing and valuing each other. Last Sunday, as we cleaned up together, Susan pulled me aside. "Mom, I need to tell you something I should have said months ago. I'm proud of you. Not just of what you accomplished financially, though that's remarkable. I'm proud of how you refused to let us diminish you, how you stood up for yourself, and how you taught us to be better people." "Thank you, sweetheart," I said, hugging my daughter. "But you need to know I'm proud of all of you too. It takes courage to admit when you're wrong and wisdom to change course." As the family prepared to leave, Madison lingered to help finish dishes. "Grandma," she said, "I've been writing about our story for one of my graduate seminars, and my professor thinks it should be published. Would you co-author an article about intergenerational relationships and challenging ageism?" The idea of sharing our story publicly was both exciting and intimidating. But if our experience could help other families avoid the pain we'd endured, or help other older people find courage to demand respect, it would be worth the vulnerability. "I'd be honored to work on that with you," I told her. After everyone left, I sat in Harold's old recliner reflecting on our incredible journey. We'd gone from a dysfunctional group barely seeing each other as complete human beings to a genuinely connected family where every person was valued regardless of age. The financial revelations had been the catalyst, but real transformation came through hard work rebuilding relationships based on mutual respect and genuine interest in each other's perspectives. I thought about Harold and wished he could see how his grandchildren had grown into thoughtful, compassionate young adults understanding the value of hard work, financial responsibility, and intergenerational wisdom. The education fund had fulfilled its purpose, not just providing money for college, but creating opportunities for learning and growth extending far beyond formal education. I also thought about the woman I'd become. I was still wearing bright colors, still posting inspirational quotes, still taking pottery classes and volunteering. But now I was doing these things from a position of strength and self-respect rather than defensive crouch against family disapproval. I learned to advocate for myself while maintaining capacity for love and forgiveness. Setting boundaries and demanding respect didn't make me mean, it made me healthier and more available for genuine relationships. Most importantly, I've proven that age doesn't diminish worth, that getting older can mean getting more interesting rather than less relevant, and that every life stage offers opportunities for growth and meaningful connection. The fund in my name became a symbol of recognition, respect, and authentic living. It proved their assumptions about aging were not just wrong but harmful. My story isn't unique. Millions of older people are dismissed and underestimated by younger family members and society generally. But it proves it's never too late to change the narrative, demand deserved respect, and show people that age-based assumptions are destructive. I hope my story inspires other older people to refuse invisibility, to demand recognition, and to live boldly regardless of others' opinions about age appropriateness. I hope it encourages younger people to look past stereotypes and discover the wisdom and perspectives older people offer. Most importantly, I hope it reminds families that love isn't just obligation and tolerance, it's truly seeing and valuing each other for who we are, not just the roles we play. At 73, I'm just getting started. I'm wearing a bright turquoise sweater as I write this, just posted a sunset photo with an inspirational quote about never being too old to surprise people. Tomorrow I have pottery class, volunteer shift at the animal shelter, and a meeting with my financial advisor about new investment opportunities. Next week, I'm starting an online animal psychology course and considering auditing a college literature class because the syllabus looks fascinating. I'm embarrassing by some standards, extraordinary by any reasonable measure, and completely, unapologetically myself. My family, the same family that once made me feel ashamed of my vitality, wouldn't have me any other way. The education fund sits at $547,000 now, growing steadily and providing opportunities for the next generation to learn and contribute. But the real legacy isn't money, it's understanding that every person, regardless of age, deserves to be seen, valued, and respected as complete. I hope my story reminds everyone that getting older doesn't mean getting smaller or less important. It means accumulating more experiences, more wisdom, more reasons to be celebrated rather than hidden away. At 73, I'm living proof that the best chapters of life might still be unwritten. And that's not embarrassing, that's extraordinary.